I want to explain my concept of the observer, which is a concept you'll often hear in quantum physics. And there are many interpretations of what it means, but this is my definition. The medium into which information is transferred and stored through direct or indirect interaction. So let's use this diagram here to explain what I mean. Imagine that the circle is the observer, and the observer can be anything. It doesn't have to be conscious. It doesn't have to be an animal, right? It can be a rock. It can be anything that can have an interaction at all. So two rocks bumping into each other counts as an interaction, okay? Because information is transferred in that interaction. So think of energy, for example. The energy transferred when one rock hits another rock and bumps it, or two pool balls on a pool table, when they hit each other, they're transferring energy, and that is information. So when information enters the observer from the outside, that is an experience, okay? That is an interaction that transfers information from the outside of the observer to the inside of the observer. Information that is transferred becomes known to the observer. Now, there are definitely different layers or levels of what it means to be known, but what we're talking about is an increased level of certainty, okay? So we're talking about increased certainty. So basically, this is what we know. So inside the sphere or inside the observer is what we know, and we know what we know based on this experience or interaction. So when, say, for example, two pool balls interact with each other, that's on a technical level similar to how when you look at something, the light from that thing enters your eyeball, right? So you can kind of think of this like an eyeball or a brain or whatever. That light enters your eyeball, and that light is carrying information essentially, because as it affects your eye, the way that it interacts with your eye transfers information into your eye, which then becomes known to the eye. And then, of course, that travels across the nerve and into your brain, and then that becomes known to your more complex mind. So information that's traveling out is expression or action. So anything that's going from the inside of the observer to the outside is an expression or action on behalf of the observer. So as the pool ball is rolling across the table, that is an action of the pool ball. So if the pool ball is the observer, then by rolling, it is acting. That is expressing information outward, putting it into the external world. So again, always think about these in terms of internal and external to the observer. When the observer is taking information internally and putting it externally, that is an action or expression. When information is being taken from the external world to the internal world, that is experience through interaction. All right, so let's go over to the door here, and I want you to think about what is behind this door. So imagine yourself inside of a house with no windows, no chimney, no way to look out, just a solid door. That's the only window into anything. But of course, it's solid, so you can't see through it, you can't hear through it, you can't smell through it, anything. So what is behind this door? Well, you don't know. We don't know. So again, if you think about how this relates to this diagram over here, what is outside, external, is uncertain or unknown, right? Just as what's internal is certain or known, right? So this is the container of the information. So when we are inside the house, thinking of ourselves as the observer, right? The house is essentially the observer, the body of the observer. We'll think of the house as like the exterior of the rock or the pool ball or the skin of our body, whatever you want to think about it as. But the point being that what is outside of us, we do not know. But through the information we have within the house, we can sometimes infer or think about what could be outside. So say, for example, we know that what's outside the house is a number between 1 and 10, right? So this is probability, because now we have limitation, right? So limitation increases knowledge and certainty. So even if we don't know what the number is that is behind the door, because we have no way of accessing that information, what we do have is information inside the house, inside the observer, right? So we're talking about information that exists here that says that it can only be a number 1 through 10. So now we know that what's outside has to be a number 1 through 10. We don't know which of these numbers it is, but now we can infer probability based on the limitation of a number 1 through 10. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that information has states, and the states are essentially on a spectrum, okay? A spectrum between what is known and what is unknown. And this is very important, and I want you to think of these states kind of like how you would think of the states of water, right? So water has states, and it's always water. Information is always information, water is always water. That's maybe too broad of a statement about water. Water might not be water sometimes. But anyways, so it can have 3 different states generally, liquid, solid, and gas, right? Now, regardless of which of these 3 states it's in, it's still water, but it behaves differently. It has different context in each of these states, right? You're not going to drink solid, you're not going to drink ice, right? You're not going to drink vapors, right? You're going to drink liquid water. That's what you're going to put into your cup. So how we use the information depends on its state. What the information is and how it interacts with us depends on the state. So we know, for example, that when information is in a state of perfect certainty, right, when there's a probability of 100%, right, probability of 100%, and it's all the way on this side, that is like a solid state, right? Everything is much more ordered, okay? Ordered and structured, okay? And then when we think about something being very unknown, right? It's completely on the outside, and we don't have these clues, right? That would be closer to the state of like a gas, where it's sort of chaotic. It's sort of unknown to us. Wow. It's sort of unknown to us, and that uncertainty means that it could be anything, right? Within whatever limitations we have, and the fewer limitations we have, the more things it could possibly be. And so that's the state of essentially chaos. And then we have this state sort of in between, which is the liquid state, which is, on this little diagram down here on the spectrum, would be sort of in the middle, right? It's sort of fluid, it's sort of flexible, and that's sort of like the range, right? This is sort of like the 1 to 10, where we have some information about what it could and could not be, right? Let's say the probability is closer to 50%, or in the case of 1 to 10, it might be 10%, about what it will and won't be, which state it's going to be in, which form it's going to take once it becomes known to us. And so the point of all this is to essentially say that what the observer is the container of information, and it separates the states of information, okay? The closer information is to the inside, okay, toward the center of the observer, we'll say, the more known it is, okay? Because it's more a part of the observer. The closer it is to the barrier between the observer and the outside, the external world, the less known it is. And so it's closer to that concept of probability where, well, we have some information about it, but we don't have enough information to know exactly what it is yet. So it's not information contained within the observer. It hasn't been determined yet, right? So it's not a part of us. It's not an experience that we've concluded, but it is still information that we have something about. And then the farther out it is, the more it's over on this end, the more it's unknown. And we'll call, 0% probability. We have no clue what it is. We have no information about it. Like, for example, asking questions like, does God exist? What happens after death? I mean, even that has some probability to it, but what exists outside the physical universe? Things like that, things we can't possibly measure, we can't really collect information on. That would be the absolute unknown, the absolute chaotic uncertain. And so again, the whole point of what I'm trying to explain here is that it's important to understand and think of the observer not as a person having a sensory experience. That is one example of an observer. But another example of an observer is the pool ball, or an atom, right? Or a photon. The moon, right? All of these can be considered observers, and any interaction, whether it's direct or indirect. So say, for example, there's a common question out there in philosophy or physics. If we believe that things don't exist when we're not interacting with them, does that mean that if we're not looking at the moon, that the moon isn't there, right? Well, in a sense, the moon changes state, right? That's what we're trying to say. So when we don't have 100% certainty about what the state what state the moon is in, then it's closer to a liquid or a gas. And what that means is simply that what we think of as the moon when we're looking at it, this big, um, this big kind of object in the sky, right? Uh, when we think of it that way, we're thinking of all the information that we do have on it, right? But we don't know. Okay, so let's say that, for example, that I turn around and the moon splits in half, right? And I don't hear it, right? And I don't see it. So I'm picturing the moon the way that I've always pictured the moon, which is this big sphere in the sky, or close enough to a sphere, whatever. But that's not what it is anymore, right? So this is not what's real anymore. This model exists internally to me, right, as speculation. So speculation, and basically what that means is that the observer is kind of collecting information. Remember, it's information being transferred and stored. The observer kind of collects it, and the last information it has is the closest rendering it has, the closest simulation that the observer has of what reality is outside of itself. So what the observer is essentially the information that has been collected and stored. And if the observer is intelligent enough, then that information is used to simulate what the outside of the observer looks like and how certain we can be about that. So does the moon exist when we're not looking at it? Well, according to this kind of states of information, yes and no. Because what do we mean by the moon? Is there something up there in the sky? Well, probably, right? But that's it. That's the whole point. But where's my probability? Probably, but are we 100% certain? How do you know that the second you turned around that the moon didn't disappear? Can you prove it? No, because if you could prove it, that would be certainty, right? That would be known, and you can't. So when you turn around, based on the information that you do have inside of you, the observer, the information you've actually collected, you cannot prove that the moon that you think of, the moon as you know it, normally, the familiar moon, is in the sky, right? What you can do is estimate based on probability that, hey, the moon's been there as long as I've been alive. Chances of anything happening to it right now are very slim. So yeah, I can guess with high accuracy that if I turn around right now and look at the moon, it's still there and it's still the same moon that I've always known and loved, right? But again, we have to think of this as states of information. So when the observer is not actively observing something or actively interacting with something, what does that mean? Well, it means that it's in a state of flux. It's in a state of uncertainty. And then we'll get more into that, what that means in terms of uncertainty and how that affects reality and our experience of reality, whether it's a conscious, intelligent being like human beings, or it's an unconscious, unintelligent being, as far as I'm aware, like a rock or a pool ball. So we'll get more into that later, but for now, I hope that this clarified kind of what I mean by an observer and states of information and how it works.